the mountains have always whispered secrets to those brave enough to listen. But in the ancient peaks of Appalachia, those whispers carry something far darker than folklore. They carry warnings. For centuries, these rolling hills and deep hollows have harbored mysteries that defy explanation. While most folks dismiss mountain tales as nothing more than campfire stories, the truth is far more unsettling. Something genuinely evil dwells within these mist-covered ridges. And today, we're going to explore the bone-chilling encounters that prove these mountains hold secrets mankind was never meant to uncover. Before we dive into the darkness, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next in this series. And if you're feeling brave enough to hear these stories, go ahead and smash that like button to let me know you're ready for what the mountains have to reveal. Now, let me paint you a picture of where our nightmare begins. The Appalachian mountain range stretches like an ancient spine across eastern North America. Its peaks, older than the dinosaurs themselves. These mountains have witnessed 480 million years of geological violence, creating a landscape unlike anywhere else on Earth. But it's not just the age of these peaks that makes them special. It's what lies beneath them and what roams through their endless forests that should make your blood run cold. The first thing you need to understand about Appalachia is that it operates by different rules. The normal laws of physics, time, and space seem to bend and twist in ways that science struggles to explain. There's something called the Brunswick magnetic anomaly that runs from South Carolina all the way up to Pennsylvania, causing compasses to spin wildly and electronic equipment to fail without warning. The very bedrock beneath these mountains contains massive quartz deposits that generate electromagnetic fields when pressure builds up. Think of it as nature's own supernatural generator, constantly charging the atmosphere with energy that affects both technology and the human mind. But the geological weirdness is just the beginning. Scientists have discovered that the Earth's protective electromagnetic barrier is abnormally thin beneath these ancient peaks. This creates what researchers call thin places, areas where the boundary between our world and something else becomes dangerously permeable. And trust me when I say that what bleeds through from the other side is nothing you want to encounter alone in these woods. The Cherokee people understood this long before white settlers ever set foot in these mountains. They had names for the things that lived in the deep hollows, rules for surviving encounters with entities that shouldn't exist. When European colonists arrived with their rigid worldviews and scientific skepticism, they found themselves face to face with phenomena their minds simply couldn't process. That's when the legends began to take shape, born from desperate attempts to explain the unexplainable. Now, I want to tell you about something that happened on a summer day in 1969 that would spark one of the largest search operations in National Park Service history. It's a story that perfectly illustrates just how quickly the mountains can swallow someone whole, leaving behind only questions and terror. Dennis Martin was just 5 days away from his 7th birthday when his family took him on what should have been a simple overnight camping trip in the Great Smoky Mountains. It was Father's Day weekend, and 3 generations of the Martin family had hiked up to Spencefield, a 200-acre meadow sitting nearly 5,000 feet above sea level on the Tennessee-North Carolina border. The boy was with his father William, his 9-year-old brother Douglas, and his grandfather Clyde. They had made the journey in stages, hiking 10 miles the previous day and camping overnight before making the final push to the meadow that morning. When they arrived at Spencefield, they found another family already there, the Carders from Alabama. No relation to the Tennessee Martins, just an unfortunate coincidence that would soon take on sinister significance. At 4:30 in the afternoon, the children came up with what seemed like an innocent game. They decided to sneak around and surprise the adults by approaching from different directions. The plan was simple enough. Douglas and the other children would approach from one side, while Dennis circled around from the opposite direction to jump out and scare them. There was just one problem. Dennis was wearing a bright red shirt that would give away their surprise. So the older kids told him he would have to go alone, circling around the far side of the field where the thick rhododendron bushes would hide his conspicuous clothing. William Martin watched his youngest son walk toward the tree line. The red shirt made Dennis easy to track as he picked his way through the mountain laurel and dense undergrowth. After about 5 minutes, Douglas and the other children executed their part of the plan perfectly, jumping out and surprising the adults with shouts and laughter. Everyone played along, acting startled and scolding the children with smiles on their faces. But Dennis never appeared. His father looked toward where he had last seen that bright red shirt disappearing into the bushes and called his son's name. There was no answer. He called again, louder this time, but still nothing came back except the whisper of wind through the trees. This wasn't like Dennis at all. He was an obedient child who always came when called. He wasn't the type to wander off or hide when he heard concern in his father's voice. William started searching toward the trees, while Grandfather Clyde searched in the opposite direction. Both Martin families spread out across the meadow, calling Dennis's name, their voices growing more desperate with each unanswered shout. By 6 o'clock that evening, as daylight started to fade and the mountain temperature began its inevitable drop, they all knew something was terribly wrong. But what they didn't know was that 7 miles southwest of Spencefield, near a place called Cade's Cove, something had already set events in motion that would haunt the mountains for decades to come. A man named Harold Key was having a peaceful picnic with his family when he heard something that would torment him for the rest of his life. Somewhere between 6 and 6:45, roughly 2 hours after Dennis had vanished, Harold heard a scream that he later described as enormous, sickening, and fundamentally wrong. It wasn't the cry of any animal he had ever heard in his decades of mountain living. It wasn't a human in distress. It was something else entirely. Something that seemed to come from a throat that had never been meant to produce sound. The scream caused Harold and his family to look up from their meal and scan the tree line with growing unease. Within minutes of that otherworldly shriek, they saw something that defied explanation. A man emerged from the woods, moving with unnatural speed through the undergrowth. But this wasn't any ordinary hiker. This figure was deeply disturbing to witness. His hair hung past his shoulders in matted tangles. His clothes were torn and filthy, and he looked like he had been living rough in the mountains for months. He moved like something was pursuing him, or perhaps more chilling, like he was pursuing something else. What made Harold's blood freeze was what the wild man carried over his shoulder. It appeared to be cloth or clothing, bundled in a way that suggested it might contain something small. The moment this strange figure spotted the Key family watching him, he immediately changed course and plunged deeper into the forest, disappearing completely into the shadows between the trees. Harold carefully noted the time, between 6 and 6:45 on June 14th. The timeline was impossible to ignore. Dennis Martin had disappeared at 4:30 from Spencefield. 2 hours later, 7 miles away, Harold Key heard an inhuman scream and witnessed a wild man carrying what looked like clothing through the wilderness. Could a 6-year-old child cover 7 miles of treacherous mountain terrain on his own? Absolutely not. But could something have carried him that far? That question would haunt investigators for years to come. As darkness fell over the mountains that night, Grandfather Clyde Martin made the grueling 9-mile hike down the mountain to report Dennis missing. Behind him, a massive storm was building, and by the time he reached the ranger station, rain was falling in sheets, 2.5 inches in 3 hours, enough to wash away any trail that Dennis might have left behind. What followed was an unprecedented search operation. Over 1,400 volunteers scoured 56 square miles of the Smoky Mountains for 16 straight days. FBI agents opened case files. Green Berets, fresh from Vietnam, joined the hunt. The operation became so massive that it started destroying potential evidence just from all the searchers trampling through the woods. 3 days after Dennis disappeared, searchers found something that changed everything. Child-sized footprints in the mud near Eagle Creek, several miles from Spencefield. The tracks told a disturbing story. One foot was bare, the other showed the pattern of a boy's Oxford shoe in size 2.5, exactly what Dennis had been wearing. The prints led toward water and then simply stopped, as if the child had been lifted into the air. Park officials immediately dismissed the evidence. They claimed the footprints must belong to a Boy Scout in the search party, despite the fact that the tracks were too far from Dennis's last known location, and none of the children searching had been barefoot. Retired park ranger Dwight McCarter studied those footprints for decades afterward. He insisted the tracks showed purpose and direction, not the random wandering of a lost child. They led away from the search area, not toward it, suggesting someone or something knew exactly where it was going. The official search continued for 2 more weeks before ending in complete failure. Dennis Martin was never found. No trace of his clothing was ever discovered. No remains were ever recovered. He simply ceased to exist at 4:30 on a summer afternoon in 1969. But here's what makes Dennis Martin's disappearance truly terrifying. It wasn't unique, not even close. The Appalachian Mountains generate more unexplained phenomena per square mile than anywhere else in North America. Children and adults vanish from areas where they simply shouldn't be able to disappear. Search dogs lose scent trails at strange points, often the same geographic locations over and over again. Experienced hikers are found dead in locations that should be impossible to reach given their physical condition and the time frame involved. These cases follow disturbing patterns that researcher David Paulides has documented in his Missing 411 investigations. The disappearances cluster around areas with specific geological features: granite outcroppings, bodies of water, places where the electromagnetic readings spike beyond normal levels. It's as if the mountains themselves are selecting victims according to some incomprehensible criteria. The Cherokee understood this long before modern investigators started connecting dots. They had strict rules about certain locations in the mountains, places where the little people lived and worked under cover of darkness, areas where the boundary between worlds grew thin and dangerous things could slip through. The Cherokee knew that some parts of Appalachia demanded respect, demanded caution, and demanded that you never venture alone into the deep woods after sunset. When European settlers arrived, they brought their own explanations for the impossible things they encountered, but their rational minds couldn't process what they were seeing. That's when the folklore began to take shape. Stories of creatures that shouldn't exist, beasts that drained the blood from livestock with surgical precision, entities that could manipulate time and space in ways that defied everything they thought they knew about reality. One of the most chilling examples emerged in 1954 in the small town of Bladenboro, North Carolina. Something started killing animals in a way that left even experienced hunters baffled. It wasn't killing them like normal predators do. It was draining them of their blood, leaving the carcasses intact but completely empty of life. Police Chief Roy Forrest had seen plenty of animal attacks before, but when he examined the dead dogs on New Year's Eve in 1953, he knew something was fundamentally wrong. There were no defensive wounds, no scattered fur from a struggle. The animals looked like they had been methodically emptied by something that knew exactly what it was doing. The autopsy confirmed his worst fears. There weren't more than 2 or 3 drops of blood left in the bodies. The wounds were identical on every victim, showing surgical precision that no wild animal possessed. Something was systematically draining the life out of these creatures, and it was getting bolder with each kill. The terror escalated when families started reporting sightings of the creature itself, a large, cat-like beast, roughly 4.5 feet long, weighing somewhere between 80 and 150 pounds. But this wasn't any ordinary predator. Witnesses described something that moved with predatory intelligence, circling its prey with the patience of something that had all the time in the world. What made the encounters even more disturbing was the sound it made. Witnesses described the same unearthly cry, like a baby crying or a woman screaming in mortal agony. Professional hunter S.W. Garrett heard this sound while tracking and compared it to a panther scream, but admitted he had never heard anything quite like it in his decades of experience. The creature's behavior defied everything hunters knew about predator patterns. It killed methodically, precisely, always draining blood with the same surgical accuracy. It moved through the forest with impossible stealth, leaving tracks the size of silver dollars, but appearing and disappearing like smoke. Most unsettling of all, trained tracking dogs refused to follow its scent, cowering and whimpering when they caught even a trace of its presence. The hunting party that descended on Bladenboro numbered nearly 1,000 men, professional big game hunters who had stalked lions in Africa, college boys from Chapel Hill looking for a trophy, local farmers armed with bird guns and rabbit dogs. They were all convinced they would be the one to bag the beast that had terrorized their small town. Not a single one succeeded. By January 13th, Mayor Woodrow Fussell made a desperate decision. He called off the hunt. There were too many guns, too much desperation, too much chance that someone would get shot in the chaos. The official explanation came when Luther Davis found a bobcat caught in a steel trap 4 miles from town. He shot it and dragged it to the town square, where the mayor hung it from a flagpole with a sign declaring this was the beast of Bladenborough. The killing stopped. The hunters went home. The newspapers moved on to other stories. But anyone with half a brain knew that wasn't the real creature. A 20-pound bobcat doesn't crush skulls and drain dogs of blood with surgical precision. It doesn't make tracking dogs cower in fear or move through the forest like a phantom. Years later, Mayor Fussell would admit to an interviewer that the whole thing was 10% real and 90% imagination, designed to bring publicity to their small town. The problem is, nobody told the mountains that the beast was supposed to be fake, because the truth is, Bladenborough was just the beginning. Across Appalachia, similar creatures have been stalking the hollows for generations. The Cherokee called them by different names, but they all describe the same basic characteristics: predators that hunt with intelligence, beasts that seem to understand human behavior and exploit our weaknesses, things that drain life in ways that nature never intended. And sometimes, these creatures take a more disturbing interest in human prey. The Cherokee had another set of stories that European settlers found even harder to dismiss. Tales of the little people who worked under cover of darkness, being so secretive that even glimpsing them at their tasks brought swift punishment. These weren't the helpful sprites of European fairy tales. These were something far more unsettling. Cherokee families would wake at dawn to find their cornfields completely cleared, stalks gathered in neat bundles, rows weeded with surgical precision. It looked like an entire workforce had labored through the hours of darkness. But there was a strict rule about this midnight help: absolute secrecy. You could benefit from their work, but you must never, ever watch them do it. The consequences for violating this rule were swift and unmistakable. Hunters who glimpsed the little people at work found stones hurled at them as they walked home. Families who spied on the nocturnal visitors discovered their kindness withdrawn forever, their fields left untended, and their corn withering in ground that had once been blessed. When European settlers arrived, they gave these beings a name that captured their most unsettling characteristic. They called them the moon-eyed people, because they seemed to function only in darkness. Their eyes adapted to see in conditions where normal humans were blind. In 1797, botanist Benjamin Smith Barton published the first written account, citing Colonel Leonard Marbury as his source. According to Cherokee tradition, when they first arrived in the region, they found it inhabited by these moon-eyed people who could not see in daylight. The Cherokee claimed they had driven out these previous inhabitants, but the stories suggested something more complex than simple territorial displacement. Physical evidence began surfacing in unexpected places. In the 1840s, farmer Felix Ashley discovered a 3-foot-tall soapstone statue 60 miles from the Georgia mountains. The sculpture depicted 2 entwined figures with oval heads and large crescent-shaped eyes, exactly matching descriptions of the moon-eyed people More discoveries followed. In 1882, excavations near Sparta, Tennessee revealed burial grounds containing skeletons of extremely small-statured people. The longest measured only 19 inches. Several showed adult teeth worn down with age, suggesting full lifespans despite their diminutive size. The bodies had been interred in stone coffins alongside items that seemed designed for beings much smaller than normal humans. No record exists of what happened to these remains, but Fort Mountain in northern Georgia bears the most substantial evidence. An 885-foot zigzagging stone wall that archaeologists estimate was built between 500 BC and 500 AD. The wall lacks defensive characteristics. It's too low for protection, has no water source, and shows poor strategic positioning. This suggests ceremonial rather than military purposes. A historical marker at the site credits the Moon-Eyed people with the wall's construction, though archaeological excavations have revealed few clues about its actual builders. What they have discovered is that the wall follows specific electromagnetic patterns in the bedrock, as if whoever built it understood something about the mountain's hidden energies that modern science is only beginning to grasp. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the Moon-Eyed people stories is how they connect to modern disappearances. The same areas where Cherokee tradition placed these nocturnal beings are the same locations where hikers vanish without explanation. The same hollow trees and cave systems that supposedly house the little people are where search dogs lose scent trails and electronic equipment fails. It's as if something that was here long before human settlement is still here, still active, still following the same patterns of behavior that the Cherokee learned to respect and fear. And when modern visitors ignore those ancient warnings, when they venture into the deep woods without understanding the rules that have kept mountain families alive for generations, they become part of the statistics that researcher David Paulides documents in his missing 411 cases. The pattern is always the same. Experienced hikers disappear from well-traveled trails. Children vanish from campsites in impossible circumstances. Search teams find evidence that makes no logical sense. Clothing removed and folded neatly in locations the victim could never have reached. Personal items discovered miles from where the person was last seen, placed in patterns that suggest deliberate arrangement rather than random loss. Most unsettling of all, when survivors are found, they often have no memory of what happened during their disappearance. They describe gaps in time, periods of darkness where they seem to exist in a different reality altogether. Some report encounters with small beings who communicated without words. Others recall being led through underground passages that don't appear on any geological survey. These modern accounts echo Cherokee traditions so closely that it's impossible to dismiss them as coincidence. The mountains haven't changed. The things that live in them haven't gone anywhere. They're still following the same rules, still operating by the same mysterious logic that has governed Appalachian encounters for thousands of years. The ancient peaks of Appalachia continue to guard their secrets, watching over countless hollows where shadows move with purpose and time itself seems to bend. From Dennis Martin's impossible disappearance to the blood-draining beast of Bladenborough, from the moon-eyed people working in darkness to the thin places where reality grows dangerously permeable. These mountains remind us that some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. The Cherokee understood this truth long ago, developing rules and rituals to survive in a landscape where the impossible becomes inevitable. Today, as hikers continue to vanish and search, dogs refuse to follow certain trails. We're forced to confront an uncomfortable reality. Something genuinely evil still dwells in these mist-covered ridges, something that has outlasted civilizations and will outlast us all. So the next time you find yourself drawn to those ancient peaks, remember the warnings whispered through generations of mountain folk. Respect the darkness, honor the old rules, and never ever venture alone into the deep woods after sunset, because in Appalachia, you're never truly alone.